I mean, I think the greatest leaders of the 20th century were Lee Kuan Yew and Deng Xiaoping. I think the juncture, if we're going to talk psychohistory here, psychohistory is the term of the science of history and future prediction. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to look at the juncture, everyone's going to have their own juncture. Maybe you're going to say it's 2008 when Obama should have had the Wall Street bankers nationalized. They should have been wiped out. They bet, they lost, they should have been wiped out. Financialization should have been stopped in its tracks. So you could say that. Sometimes I think that was one. And then, well, obviously, don't do the war on terror. But I think the other one, the one people don't really credit enough, was Deng Xiaoping's visit to Singapore in 1978.
Huh.
When he goes and he sees that it is good, and pragmatist that he was, who cares what color a cat is, whether it is black or white, so long as it catches mice. That kind of Chinese pragmatism you then see in Shenzhen and Suzhou and then eventually across the whole of China. So it's not like all of China is built on the Singapore model. It's different, it's bigger, it's much more competitive, much more dynamic. Lee Kuan Yew always said that he would never have survived in Chinese Communist Party politics because just extremely competitive and a much bigger country. I actually don't believe that, but I think he was being a little modest. He was trying to make the point that China was just such a formidable power. But I think that was the moment when China's eventual rise to global industrial and economic domination became inevitable, and that pretty much the only thing that was going to stop it from beyond that point was nuclear war.
And that's still something you believe, that we are now living in the Chinese century?
Oh, not just century. Era.
Walk me through that. Just walk the average person through that, who is still sitting there thinking America first.
Don't you want to go through?
I could, but I'm actually more intrigued. But I'm just sort of this is an interesting theme to me. I mean, we could go through your whole career in Gorka, and we'll touch it. But
let's touch on Gorka when we get to Musk,
sure.
Because I think the way that Gorka went off the rails in pretty much 2012 to 2015, I would say, was almost exactly how we see Elon Musk and Joe Rogan, for that matter, anybody that is actually in their own echo chamber, breathing their own fumes, how they go off the rails.
Let's get back to the Chinese era that we're about to. You saw this coming with Deng Xiaoping meeting Lee Kuan Yew. What is it about China? What is it about that part of the world that means that it's going to become the greatest global power?
We talk, they act. You saw have you seen the meme online? Is it Xi Jinping? Just a picture of Xi Jinping, and it says, this is alongside screens of screaming Americans, woke and anti-woke and all this kind of thing. And it just says, do nothing, win.
Meaning,
that's all there is.
Meaning,
you don't talk, you act, you build. You, as Deng Xiaoping said, you hide your light. No need to boast. No need to draw attention to the speed with which you're growing. No need to pump up your GDP numbers. No need to show off to the world. Some of the bullying in the South China Sea doesn't really quite fit into this model. I'd like to think that Deng Xiaoping would have said, hey, Vietnam, Philippines, whatever, cool, we're all cool. You're going to dominate them anyway economically. You don't need to own every single shoal in the South China Sea. But whatever, if you're a great power, you're going to get confident at some point, and maybe you're going to get aggressive. Particularly if you went through a century of humiliation, from 1850 to 1950. There's a lot of humiliation that China has to work through. England had better keep real quiet. The idea of Keir Starmer going to China to lecture the Chinese about human rights right now is like one of the most brain dead things I've ever seen in my life. No wonder he got the cold shoulder. It's like, recognize the power relationship. Just be real and recognize what you did. You know, yes, these free ports in Hong Kong and Singapore are probably the best expression of the British Empire. You know, the mercantile tradition, not the settler tradition. You know, there are two Anglospheres. There's the settler Anglosphere, which I think now we're seeing the poisonous legacy of. And then there's the free trading side of the Anglosphere. You know, Singapore is probably the best remaining expression of the Anglosphere. You know, the English language, English common law, the corporation, you know, that was Anglo and American. You know, basically the best parts of the British system without the adversarial democracy. You know, they picked and chose what they wanted from the Western system. And, you know, that is, if you look at the GDP numbers, that has been the more successful model.